Hillman sets a screen, rolls to the basket. Gray.
Welcome back to Clark USA fans. Caitlin Clark is officially back on the floor, and if you've been waiting for things to go back to normal in the WNBA, you might want to rethink that idea right now, because what we're witnessing isn't a return to normal. It's the beginning of something completely different. 8 long months away from competitive basketball, 8 months filled with rehab sessions, quiet speculation, endless questions, and complete silence from the court, and now, finally, the first real training camp footage drops. And it doesn't look like a player easing her way back after an injury, not even close. What it looks like is a system rebooting at full power, like something that's been upgraded behind the scenes and is now running faster, sharper, and more dangerous than before. The passes? Quicker than ever. The reads? Even more precise. The deep shots? They're not just falling, they're arriving before the defense even realizes they're late, like she's operating one step ahead of everyone else on the floor. You see her calling for the ball, you see her pulling up from deep without hesitation, and suddenly, this isn't just about Caitlin Clark being back, it's about the Indiana Fever transforming into something entirely new. Because now, they don't look like a team built around one superstar. They look like a team that has been rebuilt because of her presence, her gravity, and her ability to change everything. And that's where this story shifts. This isn't just about recovery. This isn't just about health. This is about what happens when the most disruptive player in the league returns to a roster that has evolved, matured, and aligned itself perfectly with what comes next. If what we're seeing in training camp is real, and all signs point to it being very real, then the rest of the WNBA isn't preparing for a comeback story. They're preparing for a takeover. Because here's the truth, the real question heading into the 2026 training camp was never about her ankle. Injuries heal. Bones mend. Ligaments recover. That part of the story was already handled months ago when the medical staff cleared her without restrictions. The real question was something much deeper, something you can't measure on an MRI, something no doctor can fully evaluate: the timing, the instinct, the split-second decision-making that made Caitlin Clark impossible to guard in the first place. Would that still be there after 8 months away? Would she still see plays before they happen? Would she still trust herself enough to make those impossible passes, to take those logo threes, to operate at a speed that most players can't even process? Because we've seen it before, players come back from long absences physically healthy, but mentally just a half step behind. The reads are slightly late. The confidence takes time. The rhythm isn't fully there. The body is ready, but the mind is still catching up, still recalibrating, still trying to remember what it feels like to move at full speed without hesitation. But Caitlin Clark didn't wait for training camp to answer those questions. She answered them months earlier on a completely different stage. Back in March, she made the trip to Puerto Rico with Team USA for the World Cup qualifiers, and instead of easing back into competition, instead of playing it safe or managing expectations, she did the exact opposite. She dominated.
Ionescu, long three, it's contested! Oh!
She didn't just perform well, she controlled the entire tournament, going up against international defenders who had spent months specifically preparing to stop her, and still, it didn't matter. She pulled up from deep like she never left. She dictated the pace. She made reads that no one else on the court could see. And by the end of it, she wasn't just back, she was the best player on the floor, earning MVP not by playing cautiously, but by being unapologetically herself. That's when people inside the game started paying attention. That's when coaches, analysts, and insiders realized that this wasn't a slow return, it was a warning sign. And one of those people watching closely was Coach Stephanie White, who saw it all unfold firsthand. When asked about Clark's condition, she didn't talk about limitations or concerns. She talked about timing. She talked about flow. She talked about how Clark was letting the game come to her in a way that you simply cannot fake during solo workouts. You either have that instinct or you don't. And Clark? She had it. So when she walked back into Indianapolis, it wasn't with uncertainty, it was with clarity. Full medical clearance. Zero restrictions. And something even more dangerous, a new perspective. In her first interview at camp, she made it simple. She feels great. She's back where she wanted to be and even better than before. But what stood out wasn't just the confidence, it was the mindset shift. A year ago, she admitted she was going through things, adjusting, learning, dealing with the pressure and the expectations. But this time, it's different. The injury, as isolating and difficult as it was, forced her to slow down and actually learn how to take care of her body, how to prepare for the long term instead of just relying on natural ability. That kind of experience doesn't weaken a player, it sharpens them.
Clock to one, Lloyd. Oh yeah!
And now she's not coming back cautious. She's coming back hungry. And the footage proves it. The no-look passes? Not only back, but even sharper, even riskier, even more precise. There was a moment in training where she fired a one-handed bullet pass that left her teammate visibly stunned, and that reaction tells you everything. These aren't normal plays. These are plays that shift momentum, plays that break defenses before they even set. And the shooting? It's automatic. Off the dribble, off screens, contested, from deep, it doesn't matter. 5 in a row from the wing. No hesitation. Full confidence. Full range. Completely locked in. But maybe the most important development isn't even what she's doing on the court, it's how she's approaching everything around it. Because now, there's maturity. There's patience. There's understanding. She doesn't need to be out there every single rep. She doesn't need to prove anything in May. She knows the season is a marathon, not a sprint. And when she's on the floor, she's at 100%. No halfway. No hesitation. Just full impact in controlled bursts. That's not a limitation, that's strategy. Which brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, the one that might matter even more than her return. Who's standing next to her? Because talent alone doesn't build a contender, chemistry does. And that's where the Indiana Fever quietly made one of the most important moves of the entire offseason. Kelsey Mitchell is back. 9 seasons deep with the franchise. A proven scorer. An all WNBA level talent. Coming off one of the best seasons of her career, over 20 points per game, elite shooting efficiency, top-tier three-point production, and a legitimate case as one of the best guards in the league. She had every reason to leave. Every reason to test the market. Teams would have lined up, ready to offer everything. But she didn't. She stayed. And not because of money, because of belief. When she explained her decision, she didn't talk contracts or numbers. She talked about the locker room. She talked about relationships. She talked about something that's hard to build and even harder to keep: family. That connection with her teammates, that trust, that environment, it mattered more than anything else. And when you look at how her game fits alongside Caitlin Clark, it all starts to make sense. Because Mitchell brings pressure. She attacks. She forces defenses to collapse. And when that happens, it creates space, and nobody in the world is better at exploiting space than Caitlin Clark. That's where things get dangerous. That's where this team becomes more than just talented. That's where they become unstoppable. Because now, it's not just about one player. It's about a system. A system built on movement, spacing, trust, and vision. A system that's evolving in real time. And if everything we've seen so far is any indication, then this isn't just a comeback story. This is the start of something much bigger.
I mean, why not? You got nothing to lose. You're in a game like this today, playing shorthanded.
And it's moments like that when she pushes the ball ahead, finds Kelsey Mitchell in stride, and the defense has no choice but to fall hard just to stop the play, that reveal the real pressure this backcourt creates. Because while defenders are scrambling to contain Caitlin Clark's vision and range, Mitchell is already attacking the gap, already collapsing the defense, already forcing chaos in ways that open everything up on the perimeter. And that's the part people are starting to understand now. This isn't just two great players sharing the floor. This is a perfectly interlocked system where each one amplifies the other, where chasing Clark off screens gives Mitchell a runway straight to the rim. And collapsing on Mitchell leaves Clark wide open from distances defenses still haven't figured out how to guard. And the reality is simple. Neither one is quite as dangerous without the other, but together, they become something you don't break apart. Something you don't gamble with, something you build a championship around, and both of them know it, which is exactly why Indiana made it a priority to keep that connection intact. And when Clark was asked about Mitchell returning, there was no hesitation, no vague praise, just direct respect. She loves Kelsey. She values what she brings. She understands that Mitchell's dedication to this franchise has been crucial, especially during the stretch when Clark herself wasn't on the floor, and she made it clear that Mitchell was a huge reason Indiana pushed as far as they did last season. And when it came to that historic contract, becoming the first million-dollar player in franchise history, Clark didn't frame it as surprising. She framed it as deserved, period. Because players who produce, who lead, who stay loyal, they earn that moment, and Mitchell earned every bit of it. And yet, as important as that backcourt connection is, it's only one piece of what's quietly becoming one of the most complete rosters in the league. Because then you look at the wings, and suddenly the depth becomes impossible to ignore, with Lexi Hull stepping in as one of the most underrated glue players in the entire WNBA, shooting 40% from three across the last 2 seasons, defending multiple positions from guards to forwards, doing the kind of work that doesn't always make headlines but wins games in the margins. And teams notice that. They absolutely notice that, because players like Hull don't stay available for long. But instead of chasing a bigger role elsewhere, she made it clear where she wanted to be, announcing her return in a moment that felt more like a statement than a decision, standing alongside Clark, reinforcing what this group has built. And when asked why she stayed, the answer wasn't complicated, it was home. And sometimes that word carries more weight than any contract figure ever could, because for a player who came into Indiana not knowing anyone, who found support, who felt embraced by the fans and the organization from day one, that connection grows into something deeper over time, something that can't just be replaced by a new jersey or a new city. And that same belief echoed through Sophie Cunningham's decision as well. Because here's a player who had openly talked about wanting long-term security, someone who had every reason to explore the market, to secure her future, to lock in stability, and yet when the moment came, she chose a 1-year deal, not because it was safer, but because she believed in something bigger, because she looked at this roster, this chemistry, this trajectory, and made a calculated decision that chasing a championship in 2026 meant more than any long-term guarantee somewhere else. And that's the kind of mindset shift that transforms a good team into a dangerous one, because now every piece isn't just talented, they're aligned, they're invested, they're all pushing toward the same goal at the same time, and you can see how carefully the front office handled it too, waiting, planning, making sure every move fit into a bigger picture before locking anything in, because nothing about this roster feels accidental, everything feels intentional, and when you actually visualize it on the floor.
Seattle knew it was coming. Ionescu hits it.
It becomes even clearer. Clark handling the ball, Mitchell spacing one side, Hull ready on the wing, Cunningham in the corner, and Aaliyah Boston anchoring the middle, and suddenly defenses are stuck in an impossible situation. Because you can't collapse on Clark without leaving elite shooters wide open. You can't overplay the perimeter without exposing the paint. And every single possession forces a decision that leads to a weakness somewhere. And the terrifying part for the rest of the league is that this is before even factoring in what's been added to make this team tougher, stronger, and more complete than it was before. Starting with the cornerstone of it all, Aaliyah Boston, who just signed the biggest contract in WNBA history. A deal that doesn't just reward what she's already done, but invests in everything she's about to become. Because at just 24 years old, she hasn't even reached her ceiling yet, and Indiana knows it. They're not paying for past performance. They're locking in a future foundation, a player who brings stability, consistency, and impact in ways that don't always trend online, but always show up when it matters most. Because what makes Boston special isn't highlight plays, it's reliability, it's toughness. It's the ability to defend multiple positions, to finish through contact, to secure possessions in traffic, to do the kind of work that holds a team together when everything else starts to break down late in games. And that's why her presence changes everything for Clark, because now Clark can push the pace, take risks, fire passes into tight windows, knowing there's someone inside who will finish, who will battle, who will clean up anything that goes wrong. And if Boston adds a consistent three-point shot to that already complete game, then defenses won't just be stretched, they'll be broken. Because now there's no safe place to rotate, no easy coverage to rely on. And that's how you build an offense capable of surviving a full playoff series, not just winning games, but controlling them, and Clark herself made that clear when Boston signed, saying nobody deserved it more, not just as a player, but as a person, highlighting the kind of relationship that fuels real chemistry. The kind of trust that translates directly onto the court, and that's what makes Indiana so dangerous right now. It's not just talent, it's connection, it's belief, it's players choosing to stay when they could have left, choosing to build instead of reset, and that culture is something you can't buy. You can only create the environment and hope the right people respond, and Indiana did exactly that. Boston responded. And now the league is left trying to figure out how to deal with a young cornerstone who is only getting better every single year. But as strong as the roster already looks, last postseason exposed a weakness that couldn't be ignored. Because when the games got physical, when the pressure increased, when every possession mattered, Indiana got pushed around, not as an opinion, not as a narrative, but as a reality. Especially against a team like Las Vegas that thrives in those moments, imposing their will, controlling the tempo, winning the physical battles that decide playoff series. And Indiana didn't have an answer then, but they made sure they would now, because everything about their offseason moves points directly at fixing that exact problem. Bringing in players who don't just fit the system offensively, but bring toughness, grit, and presence where it matters most, starting with Monique Billings, a player who checks every single box Indiana needed in the front court, someone who runs the floor in transition, fits perfectly with Clark's pace, stays out of the paint to give Boston space, attacks the glass without clogging lanes, and finishes at an elite level around the rim, turning opportunities into points with efficiency that defenses can't ignore, and beyond the stats, beyond the numbers. There's the energy, the communication.
Going to be the last two games of this regular season as Citron takes and makes from deep.
The defensive awareness that ties everything together, and what makes her addition even more seamless is the fact that she's already built chemistry with key players, having played alongside Mitchell and Clark in previous settings, eliminating the adjustment period that usually slows teams down early in the season. Because she doesn't need time to learn tendencies, she already understands them, and that kind of instant fit is rare, but it's also incredibly valuable, especially for a team trying to take the next step immediately. And then you add in a player like Myisha Hines-Allen, and suddenly the identity shift becomes undeniable, because she brings something Indiana has been missing for years: physical presence, toughness, and a mentality that doesn't just accept contact but challenges it, embraces it, forces opponents to think twice before attacking the rim. And in playoff basketball, where everything tightens, where every possession becomes a battle, that kind of presence changes the entire dynamic of a series, because it's not just about scoring anymore. It's about control, about setting the tone, about making sure the other team feels you every single time they step into the paint, and beyond the physicality. There's leadership, there's communication, there's a defensive voice that keeps everyone aligned when the pressure builds and mistakes become costly. And that's the difference between a talented team and a championship-ready one, because talent wins games. But toughness, chemistry, and trust, that's what wins titles. And right now, Indiana isn't just building a roster, they're building something much more dangerous, something that looks ready not just to compete, but to take over. And what makes this move even smarter, what makes it quietly one of the most important decisions Indiana made all offseason, is the protection it creates across the entire system. Because Myisha Hines-Allen doesn't just add toughness, she absorbs pressure. She takes on the physical punishment that would otherwise wear down Aaliyah Boston over the course of a long, brutal season, and that changes everything when the games actually matter most, because now Boston isn't entering fourth quarters exhausted. She isn't battling through fatigue when Indiana needs her to dominate the glass, protect the paint, and finish possessions. Instead, she's fresher, sharper, more effective exactly when the margin for error disappears, and for Caitlin Clark, that frontcourt reliability is just as critical, because those no-look passes, those high-risk, high-reward reads that define her game, they only work if there's someone on the other end who can handle contact, secure the ball, and convert under pressure. And now there's a target who won't fumble, who won't hesitate, who won't shy away from the hit, someone who finishes through chaos and turns creativity into guaranteed points, and that alone elevates the entire offense. Because the 2025 Indiana Fever had talent, undeniable talent, but the 2026 version has something else entirely. They have talent with an edge, talent with attitude, talent with players who are willing to hit back when things get physical, and that difference, that shift in identity, might quietly be worth double-digit wins over the course of a season, because in this league, toughness isn't optional. It's the separating line between teams that look good in stretches and teams that survive when everything gets hard. And that brings us to one of the most talked about additions to this roster, a move that sparked headlines before the player even stepped onto the court. Raven Johnson, selected 10th overall in the 2026 WNBA draft, a name that instantly triggered reactions across the basketball world, because anyone who followed college basketball between 2022 and 2024 knows exactly what that matchup history looked like. Iowa versus South Carolina wasn't just competitive. It was emotional, intense, and at times deeply personal, the kind of rivalry that builds narratives long after the final buzzer sounds. So when Indiana brought Johnson into the same locker room as Clark, the internet did what it always does. It jumped to conclusions. It predicted friction, it expected conflict, it assumed that past battles would carry over into the present, and then training camp started, and within hours, a short clip surfaced, showing Johnson seemingly walking past Clark without returning a high five. And that was all it took for social media to explode, turning a routine moment into a manufactured storyline, a full-blown locker room issue, created by people who have never experienced the reality of team dynamics at the professional level. But inside that locker room, none of it mattered, because the players themselves understood the difference between competition and conflict, and Aaliyah Boston, who actually shares history with Johnson from their South Carolina days, addressed it directly. Shutting down the noise with a simple truth: fans often carry more tension than the players ever do, and both Clark and Johnson reinforced that message publicly, making it clear that whatever happened in college stayed in college, that the rivalry was part of the game, not part of their relationship moving forward. And just like that, the narrative collapsed faster than it was created, revealing what actually matters, not drama, but impact. Because what Johnson brings to this team is exactly what Stephanie White has been searching for, a relentless perimeter defender who applies pressure without sacrificing discipline, someone who averaged one.
Julie Allemon having herself a game.
5 steals per game while committing barely over 1 foul per game in her final college season, a ratio that speaks to control, awareness, and precision, because it's easy to be aggressive. But it's much harder to be aggressive without putting opponents on the free throw line, and that's where Johnson stands out. She disrupts, she forces turnovers, she creates chaos on the perimeter. And that's exactly what Indiana lacked in critical moments last season. And beyond the numbers, there's the mentality, the hunger to learn, the willingness to ask questions, to absorb knowledge from veterans who have already navigated the league at a high level. And that kind of mindset accelerates development faster than raw talent ever could. And then there's another name that didn't generate as many headlines initially, but is quickly becoming one of the most intriguing pieces of this roster: Justine Pissad, selected 25th overall. A pick that some initially labeled as a long-term project, but early impressions are already challenging that assumption, because physically, she's impossible to ignore, standing at 6 feet 4 inches with a wingspan stretching close to 7 feet, the kind of frame that immediately stands out even among elite athletes. Drawing comparisons that analysts don't make lightly, comparisons to players like Breanna Stewart in terms of length and reach, and while those are expectations no rookie should be burdened with, the flashes she's showing in camp are undeniable, especially on The defensive end, where she's using that length to disrupt passing lanes, contest shots, recover on drives, and protect the rim in ways that most players her age simply haven't mastered yet, and offensively. Her ability to shoot over defenders adds another layer of versatility that Indiana can develop over time. But all of these individual pieces, all of these additions and adjustments, they all connect back to a much bigger vision. A plan that Stephanie White has made absolutely clear from day one, because she didn't walk into training camp with vague goals or general expectations. She walked in with a number, top 3, not as an aspiration, not as a best-case scenario, but as a baseline standard for where this team needs to be defensively. And when you look at her track record, that expectation isn't unrealistic because her previous teams have already operated at that level, building elite defensive systems that don't just rely on effort, but on communication, positioning, and discipline. And that's exactly what she's implementing in Indiana right now, drilling transition defense early, integrating new players into a unified system, reinforcing communication so that breakdowns don't happen under pressure. Because in the playoffs, it's not always the big plays that decide games, it's the small mistakes, the missed rotations, the silent possessions where communication breaks down and opponents capitalize, and that's what Indiana is working to eliminate, because when you combine that defensive structure with the offensive firepower already in place, the result isn't just a good team. It's a complete team, a team that can score from anywhere, defend every position, adapt to different styles, and most importantly, survive when the game slows down and every possession becomes a battle, because that's where the real test begins, not in training camp highlights, not in preseason optimism, but in those moments when the pace drops, the rotations tighten, and every decision carries weight. That's when depth gets exposed. That's when chemistry is tested. That's when teams either hold together or fall apart. And if Indiana is as connected, as aligned, and as prepared as they look right now, then what we're watching isn't just another season taking shape. It's the early stages of something much more significant, something that moves beyond potential and starts to feel inevitable. Because when talent, toughness, chemistry, and belief all come together at the same time, the question stops being whether a team can compete and starts becoming something far more dangerous, whether anyone else in the league is actually ready to stop them when it matters most.